Welcome viewers to another episode of Political Pulse. Today we are joined by Mark Stevens, founder of Arin Advisory and Capital, an integral venture that connects companies with not only defence forces but also plays a large role in integrating businesses across countries in the recent Australian, United Kingdom, United States Security Pact, which plays a large role in the projected growth of Australia's military capacity in the future.
Thank you, Mark, for taking the time to come on the podcast today. Despite what must be a very busy schedule, we appreciate your time today. So firstly, we would like to discuss a bit about Arin and how it provides to benefit Australian defence and, more importantly, its goals. For someone that might not know, what is Arin?
Arin is an advisory firm which came out of probably 20 or 25 years of experience of working across the defence and national security ecosystem. So back in 2017, we saw the rise of China, and we were deeply concerned about what we were seeing, and all of the people that worked in our business were veterans from the Australian Defence Force or the British military or the US military, and all of us, I think, were alarmed by what we were seeing. And so we felt that we could apply our experience in the defence and national security ecosystem to help defence forces and governments improve the quality of their thinking and decision making. So, a part of Arin is about providing advice, and we do provide a lot of advice to government, which we don't ever charge them for, but we do give them a lot of advice. We do a lot of advice with defence industry, so we're the most active advisor to defence industry in Australia. And we also have a capital business, which is because one of the great difficulties for Australian companies operating in defence is access to capital. So we wanted to solve that problem as best we could. So we have a capital business. And then with the announcement of AUKUS in September 21, we opened an office in Dallas in Texas and an office in London. So we have very long days here at Arin because we're trying to work to the US business day and the UK business day as well, but we're sitting in the middle of all of that, in the middle of AUKUS, just trying to make it as good as it can possibly be for Australia's national security.
Yeah, and in this era, protecting national sovereignty is so important, especially with Australia and not only its partners, but it's also its regional neighbours, and being able to project this national defence industry is very, very important. How does following on with this, how does Arin work to improve the capacity of the Australian Defence Force?
There's a term in defence known as capability, Xavier, and capability is the way in which defence thinks about itself. So when it wants to do something, if it's to buy a new fighter jet or buy a new tank or a new ship, it thinks of it in terms of capability. And capability is a term that describes what the effect is going to be that can be achieved by having that equipment. And it also extends to space and cyber and pretty much everything that defence does. And so really, the way in which we help defence is by working in industry and identifying companies that have developed products or services or have ideas which can improve the ADF's capability, and we bring those to defence. And because of our experience, we know how to talk to defence. And so what we're trying to do is to get the ADF the best possible effect it can from industry through improving their capability. So that might be a new way of conducting offensive cyber operations. It might be around how do you conduct electronic warfare from space. It might be about how do you improve the reliability of our surface ships so that they're available more often to be tasked. We have actually worked on all those things. So that's sort of, that's what we're doing every day.
Yeah, and so in terms of Australia's international relations and working with other regions in terms of defence, you mentioned about capability, and what benefits does this mean for Australia's international perception and involvement?
So, Nikki, there's a very great imbalance between the US and pretty much everyone else. They're obviously the apex operator in the defence space, but what I think we've seen, because of our involvement in the Middle East over so many years, what was Australia's longest war, I should say, Iraq and then Afghanistan, Afghanistan, then Iraq, and then Afghanistan again. We took our eyes off the ball in the Pacific and let the Pacific, defend for itself for quite a long time, probably, close to 15 years maybe or more. And so really what we're now trying to do is what Australia's trying to do is really project itself back into its region and become a much more responsible and cooperative partner for countries in our region. And, to the west, it goes out to Sri Lanka and to India. In the east, obviously the Pacific Islands, and out to the western areas of the US, north to the Philippines and Japan, and then south to the Antarctic. We've suddenly become keenly aware that those regions are very important to our national security. And so, what I think we're all trying to do is just improve the government and the ADF's efforts to engage with our near regional partners and improve our collective understanding about what national security looks like.
And in terms of Arin, are there any goals that they would like to achieve with regard to Australian defence?
We've probably sort of realised all of our sort of immediate goals. So, we talk to people in defence every day of the week. We've got very, very good relationships in there. We've worked on some really interesting projects. So we worked on the nuclear-powered submarine decision, for instance, with the company that makes the nuclear-powered submarines. So, I think, looking forward, what we want to be doing is more of that type of work. And we think that as China becomes more mobilised in the region, there's going to be many, many more opportunities for Australian industry to be actively involved in defence and national security. And so we expect to be doing a lot more work as a consequence of that.
And sort of regarding this growing situation with China and Australia's sort of international allies with America, United Kingdom, and a plethora of others, we know that how important Arin is advising and coordinating efforts with the Australian, UK, and US Treaty AUKUS, and more importantly, provides a platform for Australian economic growth and prosperity with support from international companies. We would like to discuss more about these diplomatic relations and your role as commentator and advisor to the Australian defence industry and your stance on AUKUS.
So Mark, could you elaborate on the benefits of multilateral trade and treaty agreements such as AUKUS?
So I think at the moment, AUKUS is I think part of the challenge for the UK and Australia, and I was in London just a couple of weeks ago at a conference called Catalyst, which is a conversation between the Australian and UK governments and Australian and UK defence industry, which was pretty interesting, really. But what I think we've all sort of understood is that there's much more that we need to do to be an equal partner multilaterally for the US. And I think the risk is that if we don't get moving, that the US will act unilaterally because there's a lot to do in the region, and they don't have to necessarily do it with Australia and the UK. They'd like to, but part of our challenge is whether we can move quickly enough to do that. Nikki, the interesting thing too, of course, is that, it's not just enough to focus on AUKUS because we've got the Quad as well. So we've got Japan and India, Australia and the US in the Quad, and the Indians and the Japanese are doing quite a lot with Australia in the region. And then we've also got a couple of other countries that we're working very closely with, in addition to our Pacific neighbours like PNG and Fiji and others. So the Philippines, in particular, the Australian Defence Force recently did a significant exercise with the Philippines where we put heavy armour and heavy equipment and heavy logistics over the shore in the Philippines. And if you look north, you'll see that the Philippines Coast Guard is actively opposing China's expansion in their region physically. There's a lot of coverage on YouTube and other places of what that looks like. We also did a similar exercise with the Indonesians more recently, and so as far as multilateral engagement is concerned, it's easy to focus on the US and the UK, but we should also be focusing on India, Japan, South Korea as well, Philippines, Indonesia, all of whom seem to be quite open to deeper and more meaningful engagement with Australia at this time, I think largely as a consequence of the risks posed in our region by China.
Yeah, and even as you said before, that it's very important in these multilateral agreements that Australia works up to its share of the load and acts like a team member within these agreements. And what benefits can the Australian defence industry observe from these security pacts for Quad, AUKUS, and from all of its different neighbours with their varying security pacts?
So we have a very interesting defence industry in Australia. So there are about 3,200 companies in the Australian defence industry space. Not all of them are solely focused on defence. Some of them have dual-use technologies. Probably over 50% of them have dual-use technologies. But of the 3,200, 2,950 are micro to small, which is sort of quite unusual in first world countries that we would consider to be, our near peers. And the thing about those 2,900, so there's 2,950 small, micro to small. There's about 18 on the Australian Stock Exchange, and then there's a couple of hundred in the middle who are sort of medium-sized. And you have a couple of those in Western Australia. Obviously, you have Austal, which is an ASX-listed defence company who we've worked with in the past. But in the small, micro to small space, you've got some excellent businesses in WA like Innovero and others who are, highly innovative. And I think what Australian defence industry, what the opportunity is there is to bring that innovation multilaterally into these other countries that we're having lots of contact with, because I think everyone's looking for innovation in the defence and national security space, because really innovation drives advantage, and really what you want to have is the greatest level of advantage that you can achieve, both as a deterrence and also, if you have to go and fight, then that tends to be, one of those things that gives you an unfair advantage. So, what I think we want to be doing, Xavier, is getting those innovative Australian companies out, through those multilateral channels into the region to be working with our neighbours and partners and bringing that fantastic Australian innovation to those countries and to those other defence forces that don't have the benefit of the Australian defence industry that we have here.
Yeah, and as you've talked about, the R&D and innovation side of military is the driving sort of force for military advantage and pretty much what all of these Australian companies are striving for, and it's extremely important. And you've sort of talked about this whole large idea of sovereignty, and that's what we're protecting with these agreements, and that's what we're looking at. So looking at this, how do these security pacts that we've sort of talked about, AUKUS, Quad, regional security agreements, how do they improve Australian sovereignty and the sovereignty of its allies?
How does it improve it?
Yeah, how does it improve it?
Yeah. Well, I think the lesson of history is that you never fight alone, right? And so, and that sort of cuts both ways, right? So if you've got very, very close agreements with a range of countries in your region, and an adversary sort of looks at Australia and understands that it probably has a number of very, very close allies that it would likely be able to call upon to assist if it found itself in some sort of international crisis. Then, in the first instance, that acts as a deterrence to aggression, and not just. And when I talk about aggression, I don't talk about defence forces fighting each other necessarily, but it also has a massive impact on the way in which our trade relationships operate, and the way which tourism and a whole range of other issues sort of play out. But we really want these close relationships so that if anyone does want to affect our way of life in any sort of way, that they may think twice about that. And I think that's one of the lessons that's come out of the Ukraine, right? So I think initially, when Russia invaded the Ukraine, they thought it would be a pretty easy process, and I think they severely underestimated the number of friends that the Ukraine found itself that it had in relation to that aggression from China. And we've seen the most extraordinary international response to assist Ukraine to resist, Russia's goals and ambitions on its sort of sovereign territory. And if we think about what does this model look like for Australia, I think it looks like something like that. It looks like a whole range of different friends and partners who'd be prepared to support and work with Australia should we need them, into the future.
Yeah, so it seems as all of these security agreements and global interactions, they offer new and exciting avenues for Australian-based military production and offer benefits to the Australian economy and the wider international community. Considering this, we would like to discuss your role as chairman of XTEC Limited and your perspective on the impacts military industry capacity can have on the Australian economy.
Now, sort of in the recent news with XTEC and you as chairman, we'd sort of like to discuss that XTEC, being a ballistic gear provider, and in the last week it had closed its R&D operations and manufacturing operations in Adelaide and South Australia, but it didn't just close these and throw that away. These operations were transferred under the roof of XTEC's HighCom Body Armor Center in Columbus, Ohio. And what exciting new opportunities does this hold for XTEC?
So there are 18 companies on the ASX that are defence related, and a number of them, and XTEC is one, probably went to the ASX too early, right? So it is quite difficult for Australian defence companies to raise capital. An easier way to do it is to list on the ASX and raise money that way. But XTEC, like a number of its peers, has sort of had a bit of a rollercoaster ride on the ASX. So I joined the board last year in February, and the business had sort of struggled for a while, and But it sort of operates in two parts. So it has this capacity to manufacture body armor and helmets. So helmets are, if you think of body armor as being, a vest and a helmet, that's normally how they're sold. We actually make the best body armor in the world. So we did at the R&D in Adelaide, and we have the lightest body armor. So it's about 30% lighter than comparable body armor made in the US and in Europe, but it has significantly better protective qualities as well. So, but we have struggled for a long time to sell that body armor to the Australian Defence Force. So the Australian Defence Force currently uses helmets imported from the US, and they've got a mix of body armor. Some of it, or much of it, is made overseas as well. And for a number of years now, we've tried to get our Adelaide manufacturing facility profitable, and basically we failed. We failed to be able to do that because we didn't have the strength of orders from the Australian Defence Force for that factory. And the problem that we also had, Xavier and Nikki, is that anything that we produced in Adelaide we couldn't sell in the US because under the Berry Amendment to the Munitions Act in the US soldiers can only wear equipment that is manufactured in the US. They're not allowed to wear stuff like uniforms and helmets and body armor and boots and all that sort of stuff. Has to be made in the US. So we can do that out of our US subsidiary, which is a company called HighCom. And you're quite right, Xavier, we have a production facility in Columbus. But anything that we manufacture in Australia, we couldn't sell in the US. So we tried to sell Australian manufactured goods into India. We've had sort of some mixed success with that. But we made a decision in June at our board meeting that we would have to close the Adelaide facility. We've moved the R&D capability to the US, so those Australians who have been doing R&D for us in Adelaide are moving to the US to continue their work. But in the intervening period, we've sold a lot of our body armor to the Ukraine, and it's performed very, very well there. And we've just started to sell some body armor to another country that I can't name, but who has some very serious national security issues right now, and you can probably guess who that is, but we're not allowed to say who. But we're still an Australian company. We still pay our tax here in Australia. We're still registered on the ASX. We still have a large headquarters here in Canberra. We have a technology division which operates out of Canberra, which imports stuff from overseas. So, it's not stuff that we make here, but we have an import business which is staffed by Australians. But sadly, the stuff that we're manufacturing is now going to be made in the US, so that we can sell that product to the US Defence Force, and the gear that we make in the US we can sell to the Australian Defence Force, and effectively it will be Australian body armor. It's just manufactured in the US. So that's just a sad reality of the situation that we find ourselves in.
And with this opening, it opens so many market opportunities and avenues for XTEC to progress forward in its market journey, especially considering its world-leading advanced protection and its ballistic armor. XTEC offers a very large amount of hope and development for lots of companies in that space. Considering this, what does XTEC's world-leading advanced XTclave ballistic armor mean for the defense industry?
So we made an investment a few years ago in an XTclave, which is like a, how do I describe it? It's a massive cylinder. So we make the body armor, plates and helmets, and then when they're made, they go into this vessel called an XTclave, which, as I said, is this very, very large cylinder. Looks like a mini submarine, I guess, is the one way to describe it. It takes multiple plates and multiple helmets. I think 80 or 100 at a time. You put them in the clave. You lock it down, and then using oil and heat, you compress the plates and the helmets to 32 atmospheres, which is what gives it its ballistic quality, right? So you compress them under pressure, and the way which you compress them is what gives those plates and the helmets their integrity to stop a bullet or a fragment of shrapnel or whatever else it might be. So we developed that ourselves, and it took some time, probably a bit longer than what we'd anticipated, but it's been absolutely fantastic as far as allowing our R&D team to develop this new technology, which is super lightweight, but super protective as well, and which even I think the US Department of Defense has now recognised as being world leading. In the Ukraine, they describe our body armour as golden body armour because it's performed the best of all the body armour that they've received from multiple sources around the world. But that's the benefit of R&D. So we will continue to do that, but we're going to do it closer to the source of production, to make the interface between the folks who produce our body armour and the people who design it, having them together in a single location is massively beneficial for the product. And also, we're always looking at how do we satisfy the interests of our shareholders, and we think this is in their best interest as well.
Yeah, now also considering these new technologies that you were talking about, especially if that high-tech sort of advanced researched method, we're also seeing that these opportunities, these multilateral security pacts, they have a huge impact on defense industry companies, and means that they can migrate overseas easier, considering the same as XTEC. Through Arin and AUKUS, events such as XTEC's move from Australia to overseas to the US could become a reality for defence industry companies. What could this do for Australia and its allies' economies?
So for an Australian company, it's difficult to go to the US, right? So at the moment, one of the focus areas within AUKUS is how do we. So in North America, the Canadians have a series of offsets with the US government that allows their companies, Canadian companies, to sell to the US Department of Defense as though they're a US company, right? So they have an offset. Under AUKUS, both the UK and the Australian governments are trying to get a similar offset for our own defence industry companies. So at the moment, it is extraordinarily difficult to sell to the US Department of Defense. Primarily, there's a whole range of legislation. There's the Berry Amendment, there's the Munitions Act, and a whole range of other legislative impediments to not just Australian companies, but a whole range of overseas companies selling into the US. For the vision of AUKUS to be realised, Nikki and Xavier, we've got to address those impediments, and we've got to find a way. And really, this is sitting in Congress at the moment, waiting for an approval an offset or what the US calls a set aside to allow Australian companies to sell into the US on the same terms under the same arrangements as US companies. And it's politically very difficult, but we're hoping that we will get an offset, and that'll mean that a whole lot of other Australian defence companies will be able to move to the US as well. So we have a couple of clients, so obviously I'm the chairman of XTEC, but in Arin, we have a client called Birdon, Birdon, who are a shipbuilder in Port Macquarie here in New South Wales, who have done about $4 billion worth of contracts with the US government, an $800 million US contract with the Army, and about $3.2 billion with the US Coast Guard, manufacturing ships in the US, but as an Australian company. So there are some very good Australian companies operating in the US, but if we can fix this legislative impediment in the US, then there will be plenty of opportunities for other Australian companies, I should say, to be selling into the world's largest defence and national security market, which would be a great thing for Australia, for those companies, for our exports, and also a great thing for AUKUS as well.
So, Mark, how did the integration of the new technologies across defence forces improve defence capabilities?
So, if you look at the Ukraine, then what you notice there is that is this intersection of old technologies with new, right? So you've got tanks and artillery and soldiers on the ground, all sort of fighting in a way which we recognise and which we've seen in the past. And then suddenly you start overlaying that with things like drones or new types of missiles or cyber warfare and innovation from space. So, what that tells us is that the country that has the most innovative set of solutions is possibly more likely to win than that company that does, or that country, sorry, that doesn't. And so innovation gives us advantage, and advantage gives us a better chance of winning. So really, we want to be able to get as much innovation as quickly as possible into the defence ecosystem to give our soldiers, sailors, and airmen and women the greatest advantage possible to fight and win. That's effectively what we need to be able to do.
Well, thank you so much, Mark, for being on the podcast today, and we hope to see these benefits helping Australia and international trade.
Yeah, also, it's just thanks for taking time on the podcast today, despite the busy schedule, and we extend our thanks for you to being on the podcast today, and we hope that our listeners and viewers will be able to pitch in and do a bit more research on Arin, AUKUS, XTEC Limited, and all of us.
Guys, thank you for your time today as well. I think what you're doing is fantastic, so well done, and very happy to answer any questions you've got at any time. You've obviously got my details, so reach out if you have anything else that you wish to ask about or discuss.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.